I'm not a teacher by profession, nor do I have the skills to teach. And yet, my tryst with teaching began with my neighborhood children. I live in a modest housing colony in Panjim, which has about 70 families, and I often play with them in the evenings. So one day I found them very upset, very dejected, and very angry. And when I inquired what was the problem, they mentioned to me that a few adults were not letting them play. And what were the games? Football and cricket, because they were considered to be very boisterous. They were also not allowed to make loud sounds because apparently that disturbed the tranquility in the colony. So, what did we do? I asked them whether they would like to come with me to explore the outdoors. At that point, I was also spending a lot of time with my husband and children, doing bird watching on nature trails or just exploring various parts of Goa. This is my backyard. This is my classroom. I spent a lot of time here, and the children were excited to come along with me. So, on the first day, we went to the nearby fields and the wetlands, and we just walked along. They were armed with their cameras, with little notebooks. And as we walked along, I just pointed out to a few plants that I was familiar with. We all know what is Mimosa pudica. It's basically the touch me not plant. And the children were engaged. They started touching it, looked at the reaction, and that was all that I had to do. After some time, they noticed little insects, little wasps, flitting about from flower to flower. After some time, they noticed butterflies sitting on different leaves. When we looked closely with a magnifying glass, we noticed that there were tiny specks of gold, which were actually eggs that it had just laid. We also heard a cacophony of bird call. There were parakeets feeding on the rich and fresh rice that was grown in the field. There were also these bioweaver birds that were making nests from the blades of grass from the field. They also noticed a garden lizard that was waiting to pounce upon a butterfly. They also noticed an interesting bird with a curved beak wading into the water, trying to feed on snails. And as you all know, snails are considered pests by farmers. The experience was exhilarating, and a memory was made. A lesson was learned that no textbook could capture. We went back home, and I just gave some assignments to the kids. The kids were also considered to be completely failures, back in school because they were called academically very weak. I don't know what that term means, but I found them to be very, very interested in learning. So the children who had a limitation of language wrote a narrative in Konkani, Marathi, Hindi, and some of them even English about the experience that they had just had. Some of them made a list of what they had seen. I'd rattled off some names, so they just jotted that down. And some of them had made beautiful illustrations. Now, the purpose of this was to document it on a blog. I run a number of blogs. I've been using this to share it with others. And they were excited to see, their pictures, their write-ups, their images. I also write in the local newspaper, so I send these articles for publication. They were very excited on the next day to see their names and their experience shared with a wider audience. Some of the organizations that I was associated with use these pictures, to develop flashcards. And the children were again excited that their experiences were used to develop educational tools. A few months down the line, we had explored so many places, neighborhoods, other villages, and the hinterlands of Goa that one fine day, when a friend of mine, Pankaj Lad, who is excellent with bird calls, was conducting a talk for school students, I took these children along. And every bird that he showed, every bird call that was played were identified by these children like little ornithologists. My first contact with schools began when a dear friend and environmentalist, Bittu Sehgal, asked me to conduct the Kids for Tiger program in the schools in Goa. I had no idea how to present this, project to schools because I had no interaction at the school level. I didn't know how to talk to children about saving tigers. And when I approached a lot of principals, they asked me very difficult questions. Some of them questioned me saying that you haven't seen a tiger, so what are you going to talk to children about? How are you going to talk about conservation? I was intimidated, but my passion for children and sharing with them, what I'd experienced allowed me to take the plunge. When I went to the schools, when I interacted with them, I was shocked. They had only book knowledge. When I asked them to identify a hornbill that is so common in Goa, they called it the toucan, which is seen in South America. They had very little knowledge about Indian history, Indian geography, local language, or local assets, but knew everything what was taught in the textbooks. So I found that the children were literally in prisons, forced to teach whatever was there in the book and to churn it out by rote. They had very little experience outside. They had no concept of a live lab. Okay. So I think that probably if you dressed up parrots and sent them to school in school uniforms, it would not make any difference to them. I also found that outside exams, tuitions, they really didn't have a life. There was no camping because parents were too sensitive, too cagey to send them out. Managements also didn't want to take a risk. Now, in this very complex situation, what did I do? I tried some of my outdoor learning models. I want to share with you about 4 of them, which are very exciting. This one is called Trailing Biodiversity, which I did with some of my friends who were students then. So basically, it was like a primer. The children were taken out into their immediate neighborhood or campus. The idea was to get them acquainted to what was there in the natural world outside. So there was a lot of noise. They were very excited. Some of my friends were so irritated with the noise. They said that this is not going to work. But children need that initiation. It is okay if they make a noise. And maybe that is not allowed in classrooms, but it's perfectly allowed in a natural environment. So the purpose of doing this project also was, to collect data for Goa. As you all know, Goa has very little data in terms of its natural history, in terms of its biodiversity, unlike the rest of India, okay, because the British helped in documenting a lot of it. So what we did was took pictures of whatever we saw in terms of flora and fauna, uploaded it on this website called the India Biodiversity Portal. And the scientists and researchers there help you to identify. Many a times, species which have been thought to be extinct have been rediscovered. So basically, the students were used to pull into this missing data, and it was a great exercise of observation and seeing and learning. The second experiment I want to share with you is called Metamorphosis. And we started off this as a project called Metamorphosis with Mrinmay. Mrinmay is a dear friend. She was a student then, and she was mad about butterflies. And she had taught me how to nurture butterflies from a caterpillar. So I had done this over a couple of years after learning from her. One day, I heard my mother, scream out saying that there are a lot of worms on the curry leaf plant. I rushed and saw that it was a caterpillar of a common Mormon butterfly. So I nurtured them. I took lots of them. They were about 10 or 15. And I put them in these containers as Mimre had taught me. Okay. And since there were too many, I offered to give one of these live labs to the school that I was associated with, giving instructions to the children to feed it regularly and to clean the container. The whole process takes about 15 days. And in about 2 weeks, the children reported back saying all the caterpillars that were there turned into butterflies, and they released them. And they said it was by far the most, memorable experience they'd ever had. And again, something that textbooks had never been able to capture. The third project that I want to share with you is the process of learning through making. So there was this principal from a school that contacted me saying that they have very little space and they needed to sort of make a temporary structure to host or hold workshops. So as an architect, my basic initiative was to design and then to make it and execute it. But I thought, why not involve children in this whole process? So we asked the children to do a little bit of research. I was assisted by this trainee called Aishwarya Rege, who helped me with this. The children found out what are the best, temporary structures. It's a great exercise for those who like maths and even those who hate geometry, this is a very good primer. So they found out, and we chose something called a geodesic dome. A geodesic dome is nothing but something made of triangles, and you can make small structures like a tent to a large structure for exhibitions. And they used paper, newspapers, rolled it up into pipes, cut it into the desired sizes, and we did a scale down model of the same. It was a great exercise. The fourth model was to illustrate why education needs to be inclusive. And I just wanted to try this whole model where the teachers eliminated and children learn through sharing and collaboration. I work with a blind school in Panjim, and I work with an eco club of a school nearby from Auxilium. And what we did was we asked some of the students from a regular school to bring found materials like shells, anything that was textural found in nature. They brought this to the visually impaired children. They shared with them. They allowed them to touch, feel, and help identify. And they sort of created a bond. They became friends forever. Following this exercise, we took the visually impaired children outside and asked them to lead, to identify calls in nature and calls of everyday life. It was fantastic because they became teachers, in return sharing their experience. The turning point came when I was invited to teach at the college level. I was selected as an adjunct professor at the Goa College of Architecture and also as visiting lecturer at the Dempo BBA, which is a business school. I've been teaching there for 5 years now, and all my classes, 90% of my classes have been outdoors. And the challenge has been here to take these models to a next level of community participation and social entrepreneurship. I want to share this model with you, which is very close to my heart. So the idea was to talk about climate change. Climate change is very real, and it connects not just to environmental problems, but it also connects to history, geography, science, and economics. So we took them to a water body. In Goa, we have these shallow water bodies called khazans. They're part of our unique man-made history. They're 3,500 years old, built by humans, and they support many traditional occupations. So there's salt harvesting, there is fishing, there's even agriculture. And all the water in these areas is very shallow. It was surprising to learn that 99% of the children didn't know swimming and they had a fear of water. And it's ironic because we live in a coastal city, and all of us are supposed to know this. So we took them, we asked them to bring along found material, anything that would float, salvaged material, waste material, and make an emergency pontoon boat. So the idea was also to teach them a little bit about disaster, emergency, and floods, and how to save people, and also give an insight into entrepreneurship opportunities. So there's a lot of product making here. So they put it together, it was like a big picnic. At the end of it, all of them were on the boats, rowing happily, having lost the fear of water. I've been sharing all these experiments on a blog. I have a number of blogs. This is one of them called Mission Green Goa, for anybody and everybody to try out these exercises because they're so simple. I was not a teacher, but I could teach in a different way, and so can you. And this module is not new. This idea is not new. We have all heard of Shantiniketan, which originated in India, where the teacher sat with his students in the pleasant shade of a banyan tree. And nature took over. Nature was the teacher. I want to influence a lot of people. I want to influence policy. I want to influence education in India and outside, and I've had a lot of people encouraging me. I met Professor Mark Long from the US, who teaches literature with a focus on environment. I've met Padma Shri B.V. Doshi in India and Professor Neelkanth Chai, who have encouraged me and asked me to present this across India. I need your help here. I want you to influence your children. I want you to influence the managements of schools that you're associated with. Because it is time that we free our children from the confines of a classroom and the limitations of a textbook. Thank you.